So my name is Allison. I'm the founder and CEO of Agrilyst, and we call ourselves the digital cooperative. What that means basically is just we do software and we help farmers do more with less. So we're trying to help them be more efficient, generate more revenue, cut down on costs, figure out the learning curve, and jump over that as fast as possible. And if anybody's seen the big quote from Mark Andreessen, software is eating the world, we like to talk about software literally feeding the world. And this is a picture from one of our customers up in Canada. But my talk today is mostly going to be around software, a little bit about what we do in our journey, but mostly about some of the challenges in the industry and how software can play a bigger part, and how there's opportunities for hardware and communication between the two. And so I started Agrilyst about 2.5, actually almost 3 years ago. Before that, this was my office, and I spent 4.5 years here as the data scientist running operations. And what my job was to look at was how can we find ways to increase revenue as much as possible. A lot of times that meant physically pulling as much product as we could out of the greenhouse. I have the blood on scars to show the hard work that goes into farming. But a lot of it was digital too. It was how do you look at your energy usage? How do you look at your machines and when they're on or off? And how do you look at your fans and your lights and the biological components of growing food and seeds and growing media and nutrients and all of the things that go into actually producing plants to actually find ways to increase that revenue. And what I learned is it's really hard, and a lot of that stems from the tools that we had. I, like a lot of our other farmers, were using Excel and pen and paper to do that. When we did have devices in the greenhouse, unlike conventional field agriculture, we did have control systems controlling your temperature, humidity, CO2, lights, and nutrient dosing. But a lot of those were legacy hardware systems, so it's a good follow-up because they need sensors to help them figure out when they're on and off and running at optimal. But right now it's mostly manual, and how that data gets into a system, it doesn't exist. They're locally stored on a computer in your farm. If you have connectivity, maybe you can do exports and then send them to somebody if you want to do analysis on them, but most often or not, you just get really messy graphs that are hard to interpret, and you don't do anything with them. On top of that, you also have production planning data, which is done by the grower on a day-to-day basis. Usually that's done in Excel or on pen and paper. You have your sales information coming in from QuickBooks. So you have this ton of information, but none of it is really accessible to you, which becomes a really big problem when you want to do analysis on it. And I, like other farmers, saw an opportunity there because there's ways to increase revenue by looking at data. And most farmers agree with that. There's adoption challenges and there's things that you learn along the way there, but the general thesis that data is important to your farm is something that not only I see or investors see, but also farmers are seeing this on a day-to-day basis and they're investing in it, which is great. So when I was starting to think about this business model, I was saying, here's a problem, I'm having it, I'm going to try and pay for software, and I contacted 3 software engineers I knew and said, hey, can you build this for us? They didn't want to do it. They didn't think it was a good enough market at the time. So I kept poking around and I kept poking around, and this number kept coming back to me. This 6 million greenhouses out there in the world producing vegetables with no data. And that to me just seemed really horrifying when you look at the statistics in food production, and that we have to produce more, we have to use less resources, we have to do this more efficiently, but they don't have the tools to do it. So this picture in the background is from Almeria in Spain, where there's about 30,000 hectares of greenhouse, so you can actually see it from space. And there is low tech as you can possibly imagine, but there's so much data available to the farmers, it's just inaccessible and they're not using it. And so when you look at indoor farming, which is the market we're dealing with, we're looking at controlled environment. It can be everything as high tech. So this is a system made by a company in Finland called Green Automation, where the entire system is fully automated. There's no labor involved in the process at all. To something that's fully enclosed, so something like Bowery Farms, I know they've given a talk here before, or Aero Farms in New Jersey, to lower tech. This is one of our customers in Florida, who you can see it's open air, but it is covered. There's control systems, they're on dirt floors, but they are doing more efficient because of the element of control. They're able to do more crop turns, and they are able to actually implement changes based on data. So there's a pretty wide spread here. So when we're talking about focus, this was one of our big challenges was, okay, well, who do we go after? Who do we figure out? How do we sell to them? How do we build a product around them? Are they similar enough? And the number one challenge when you talk to any of these growers, though, consistently across the board was profitability. And on average, the farms that were profitable that we do a survey every year were 7 years or older. So it takes a long time to get there. And so our thesis was, okay, let's get farms to profitability. Let's take that at least as a core thesis, and let's build some software around it. And let's focus on getting farms to profitability faster. So increase revenue and do it faster. And this is our very embarrassing second version of our software, but we're happily embarrassed by. And I want to talk a little bit about the product journey. So we had a first version, except for that the first version was just a PDF. And what we did was we went out to my former employer, and I said, hey, we can take your Excel spreadsheets that I had been working on, and we can digitize those for you. And so what we did was we walked in with a PDF map and said, hey, would you buy this if it looked like this on a screen? And the grower said, yeah, I would buy that. I'd pay a few $100s, I'd pay $1,000 a month for that. And we said, great business model. And so we created this dashboard for them, and all it did, if you can see on the left-hand side, all it did was take spreadsheets in and make graphs out of it, and then parse some of the information to create interesting modules for the grower, and it did nothing more. No API, no digital connectivity to any devices, no analytics. It was just a graphing mechanism that people said, I'm gonna buy that. And we focused in on that thing, and kept going and kept going and kept going. And now the software is fully mobile. It's you can use it on any device, but it's entirely comprehensive of every data point that happens from seed through sale. So we deal with your production planning, which we've automated. We can pull data in from any device. We've become agnostic and started trying to create API standards in the industry for those. We do analytics on it, so we can do a full suite of analysis on your data to understand how to improve your operation. We can understand when you're running low on inventory and help you connect to buyers on that front. We can help you connect to sales front. So it's grown a lot in the last few years. But the key was that we always, and this was one of the things that I took away from this was, and it took a little while to get there, but and this is a software thing too, is that you can always iterate, and you can iterate really, really fast. And the key thing that we had was customers who were paying for the product, which made it really great to iterate with them. And I blame a lot of our success so far in product on having really close relationships with our farmers and having them be the best and worst customers in the whole world. They are very hard to sell to, and they are very picky about technology, but once you get them on and they're paying for it, they're the most honest people on the planet because their margins are so slim. And so we made it a really big point as a company to talk to our farmers pretty much every day, to get their feedback, to pick their brains about what they want to see, and to build on that continuously. And so from a what we do perspective, this is a map of the general workflow of most indoor farms, from production planning all the way through harvest and sales. And so most of the things on this map and in a farm can be automated using machines. Seeding is a really good example. I can hand put seeds into a tray. That's very labor intensive. It's not optimal in any capacity, but I can put a machine in and I can automate that process. Harvesting, I don't have to actually hand harvest anything anymore. I can use a machine, specifically in the indoor farming space, and there's machinery for that. But the other 30%, these things in green, are the things that I'm interested in. They're the things that can be automated using data and software. It's things like production planning. What am I planting? Where is it going? How long does it need to grow? What's the optimal time to grow? How does it interact with its climate? And what should I be planting based on my market data? It's germination and IPM, which is pest management, and climate management and nutrient management, all of the things that are happening while a plant's growing and that you're managing with hardware to actually create the optimal space for the plant. It's inventory management. Once you are committed to a buyer, are you committed to that buyer? Are they the best buyer? Is it the pricing fair? Is it the right pricing? Is it the right product? Can you get something better in the market if you understand who the other players are? Selling, it's marketplace. It's how do these farmers actually connect to a buyer? What do those contracts look like? Do they have contracts? Is it more real time? Are these urban? Are they rural? How does that supply chain look? It's forecasting and using your data in a forward-looking way. So those are the things that we're looking at. And it's taken us pretty far. So similarly, this is actually an older map. We're now in 10 countries. We've added African customers, Spanish customers, and Australian customers to this. But the nice thing is that we are working with hundreds of farmers now around the world, and what we've seen is a lot of consistency in the data. We've got over 800 different varieties using the system. And continuously what we've gotten to is 90% accuracy on forecasts, 30 days or 60 days out, depending on what you need. We've got really good pricing information on what they're selling for it in various locations. We've got pricing data for inventory so what are they paying for seeds and nutrients and grow media. And we can use all this information to start providing them additional services into what comes next, right? So some of the big challenges that growers have, if you break down what they're spending money on, labor, you can see 49% is on labor. So this is a really big opportunity for the machinery space and hardware space. How can we automate a lot of that labor out? But it's also an opportunity for data. If you can match up your labor hours correctly to the tasks at hand and only hire the staff that you need for a day to perform those tasks, that's a huge way to improve and cut down on that. Rent, packaging, energy, those are a huge component. So anybody who's in the real estate space, that's a big opportunity to start working with some of these growers on leasing options. Energy, same thing. Renewable energy or energy management or sensors and hardware side, there's a big opportunity there. Input, so growers are paying 10% of their, or this is just hydroponics, but 10% on seeds, nutrients, and grow media split about equally. So how do you reduce that cost? Lighting, of course, big one, right? Indoor farms do have lights, whether you're a greenhouse or a fully enclosed vertical farm, they're running lights. So you can see on the top there is vertical farming, on the bottom is greenhouses. Both have supplemental lighting. Both are spending a good chunk of money on energy, whether that's lighting or HVAC. So how do you reduce that energy cost? How do you reduce the cost spent, whether it's through financing or supply management? Those are big business opportunities. And then the top three goals that we see from farms, profitability, number one, of course, increasing revenue, similar, and expansion. Getting access to capital is a huge challenge for growers. So whether that's debt financing, loans through banks, a lot of folks are going after VC. I tend to think that's not the correct financing mechanism for farms, but getting access to that capital no matter what and making it and connecting folks correctly. So we're trying to think about a lot of this, but these are business model opportunities for a lot of other folks mostly. And then what we do, so we're focused on these three things. We're focused on security. How do you walk away from your farm at the end of the day and know that everything's going to still run? This is a huge emotional thing for farmers that we actually had a customer come up to us at a conference who said, I got to come to this conference because I can see on my phone that my team is doing the things they need to do. But it's simple, right? If you're in a vertical farm and your lights go off for a few hours at night, you might lose $30,000 worth of crop in one day with 4 hours of downage on lights. So knowing, having alerts, making sure your devices are working correctly, your team is working correctly, that your markets aren't going to hell while you're gone, that security is a huge peace of mind, and it's a really good sales mechanism. Compliance, so the other thing that we're really focused on is food safety. The Food Safety and Modernization Act was passed by Obama, is now in act and being regulated as of December 31st. It means that every farm that generates $25,000 or more has to be federally mandated to comply, where they never had to do it before. It's going to cost small farms up to $25,000 a year to do the record keeping when they only make $25,000 a year. So it's a rough thing that they have to deal with, so breaking down barriers on that, and then scale, helping the industry scale. Just some quick lessons that I learned. Early beta period, I agree. One of the best things that we did was go into it with a partner who wanted to iterate with us and buy it from day one, so you can get sort of that proof of concept as fast as possible. Two, I think about product customer fit a lot as opposed to product market fit. I think that if you're going after a venture back to market, it should be big enough inherently, but thinking about how you get to product customer fit where customers love and use your product and can't live without it, because that's the stickiest way that you're going to keep churn low and keep your growth high. Don't be afraid to throw things out. I think this is the hardest thing for a lot of entrepreneurs, to admit when things just don't work. We recently had to throw away an entire product tier that we realized just did not work. We wanted to make it easier for even smaller growers, like a backyard farmer or somebody who wants to scale up and is doing R&D right now to get on, and it just was not a fit for our product at all. So we had to throw that out, and it's been great. But don't be afraid to throw things out. Selling frontier tech, so selling deep tech or frontier tech, it's really, really, really hard. This is one of the biggest things that we are dealing with on a day-to-day basis, is we're selling to farmers, and our value proposition is that it's not profitable, so you should buy something. And that is a really, really hard value proposition to sell. It's hard because you're oftentimes creating a market as opposed to selling to an existing market. You're oftentimes selling to folks who don't understand your technology and don't know what it is or does. So the biggest thing that we had to learn was find that product magic as fast as possible and sell it. And then building the right team, we committed to building. For us, it's really challenging because we're in ag, we're in software, we're in hardware, we're in API connectivity. So we had to have a lot of talent, but we one of the things we did really early on was we committed from day one to building a remote team. So a lot of our engineers are in upstate New York. We have a grower in Montana, California, and then in New York we have our sales office. And choose your investors is my last one. I think it's really important for entrepreneurs to not just go out and raise money and just accept any money that comes to you, but be intentional about it and choose investors that can really help you get through some of these learning curves a lot faster, or help you connect to these big customers, especially if you're selling to enterprise or hardware, or things with longer sales cycles. It's really, really helpful, and it can be really helpful to actually have your investors not just be money, but also networks and connectivity and advice. And once you're committed to bringing them on, my advice is just take advantage of that. So that's my time, a little bit over, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Who were those first customers, and how did you find them, the ones you partnered with?
Yeah, so our first customer was my former employer. So that's always good. And then our next few customers all came from my experience in the industry. And one of the nice things about farming is it's a pretty tight-knit community. And I think a lot of these industries it's just hard to leverage it. So I just knocked on doors of folks that we had known for 4 or 5 years to try and who were building the industry on the ground floor, who were former competitors of ours, and just worked really hard to convince them that I was not just trying to steal their data.
Great.
It's behind, the light is blocking you. It's good, it's a game.
I might have missed, oh, that was loud. I might have missed if you said it, but is all of the data manually inputted into the app from the farms?
No, it's about 50-50 right now. So what we do is we take any data that didn't have a digital home before, and that would be manually entered. So that's things like, that's things that wouldn't have a sensor reading, right? So production planning, things like that. Anything that is connected to a device, we pull in through our API. So we built an API, I think within the first few months of having a product that would hopefully connect to most of the climate control systems. It now does connect to 90% of the climate control systems on the market. And then you can add in pretty much any other device if you had them, just plug them right in.
Hey, Allison.
Hey.
You talked about the use of lights. You mentioned a little bit like issues related to energy. You've got a number of different value propositions. How do you see energy with these farmers being something that either becomes more or less prevalent as a part of what you help them with?
Yeah, so energy is an interesting one. I think it's one of the things most people are paying attention to a lot right now, because as the industry starts to grow and it is really energy intensive, it becomes a huge energy load. There's only so much you can do. So if you look at fully enclosed vertical farms, for example, if we were to build a farm in here, you have to run your lights about 16 hours a day. That's non-negotiable. It's how the plants need to grow. But the thing that you can do is you can run them at optimal times. So you can start to think about off-peak pricing, reducing load demand and things like that. You can also invest in different devices. So there's things like CO2, which can offset lighting needs, LEDs, of course, and so there's different hardware things that we can do on a systems level. In greenhouses, it's a lot easier because you don't technically need supplemental lighting depending on your location. So you can try and locate strategically, but a lot of the focus right now is on load demand and when you're running your lights and how to reduce it as much as possible via biological or lower energy intensive practices.
Allison, so I loved how you guys started with the PDF. First, like version 1.0 was PDF, version 2.0 was just like processing Excel files. Amazing kind of like lean IoT. You and Andrew both, that this is like a master class on how to do IoT and hardware in a lean way. When do you think you found product market or product customer fit, and how did you know that you hit it?
It's a great question. So I do. I think the markers are very different in ag than they are in things like consumer. And I think you can hit product market fit at much lower rates of customers. I do, and the trigger I use there is churn. So we ended after a full 12-month cycle with 0 churn and 500% growth. So that to me was the point where the product was sticky enough that people were seeing true value and weren't leaving the system and were willing to even pay more because we had sort of negative revenue churn. So people were actually growing with us. And so yes, the longer term question there is different though, because we're starting to expand into newer markets right now. So on new product, no, we're brand new. We're doing testing cycles, like Andrew mentioned. We're doing now for the next 10x for us. But for the product as it is now and software alone, yes. Mm-hmm.
So going back to the energy management. Sure. Do you have any plans to go into that space also?
We're a pure software company, so we're limited in the things that we can do. We can do the analytics on it. We can do recommendations on when to run your loads, and we are starting to do that. But we don't push control. We're not lighting, we're not a lighting company. So there's only so much we can do. We do, on the lighting side, we actually work with a number of the LED manufacturers to do R&D on the biological side of wavelength optimization and things like that. So there's a scientific side to what we can do with energy management. There's not so much on the hardware and control side that we can do.
All right, I think on this note, this was terrific. Thank you so much. Thank you.